Our church, Stanwich Church, is almost 300 years old. It was founded in 1731, which is 1 year before George Washington was born. It's an old congregation. We have about 600 people. And congregations that are that old here in the Northeast, well, many of them are not really growing these days. In fact, they're shrinking. A lot of younger people are just not going to church anymore. But our church is actually growing. And not only are we growing in our Greenwich location, we felt called to expand into Stamford. And we've really been guided by three ideas as we have expanded into Stamford. The first one is what I would call third place. That's the phrase that Howard Schultz, the founder of Starbucks, uses to describe a gathering place for people to connect with community. Third place meaning your first place is your home, your second place is your work, and the third place is that place to gather. Just a couple generations ago here in our country, a lot of people thought of their third place, although they weren't using that term yet, they thought of that third place as their church or their synagogue. But as fewer and fewer people were involved in religion, Howard Schultz came along and he said, what if the coffee shop was that third place for community connection? So we've been thinking about that as a church, saying, okay, if people are no longer coming to church, but they are coming to coffee shops, what if we brought the coffee shop model, the third place, right inside a church? And so one of our visions for this new church location is to have a 7 days a week coffee shop right in the middle of it all. We also are driven by this idea of second chance employment. Second chance employment. We support some local organizations, some local ministries that help men and women come out of addiction to drugs and alcohol. We get to know these people and we fall in love with them because they're so great, but we also have our hearts broken when we see their stories, because even after they get recovery from addiction, they have a hard time getting full-time employment because there's big gaps on their resume, or they may even have a criminal record, and so employers don't necessarily want to hire them. We are committing to second chance employment. We're committing to hiring these graduates of addiction recovery programs. Give them a job. They can work with us at the church or at the coffee shop for a year, maybe 2 years, get some training, and then we can bring them across town and recommend them to other managers and small business owners, so hopefully they can get long-term employment. So third place, second chance, but ultimately we're driven by what we think of as first love. In the Bible, in the New Testament, God calls our first love the love for Him, the love for Jesus. And He says, you have fallen out of love with your first love, those of us who have walked away from the faith. So ultimately, we want people to get a cup of coffee, we want people to connect in that place, we want second chance employment, but we really want people to be reminded of their first love, the fact that God loves all of us and wants us to love Him back. So we hired a realtor a couple of years ago now, and we were looking at properties in the South End. That's south of 95 on the map. And we were looking there because we had heard that that's where a lot of young people live. But we just couldn't find the right space, and we had a couple deals that fell through. And finally, our realtor said, we should really think about downtown. We should think about right in the center of the city. And so we started looking right in downtown, and at first didn't have much luck at all, actually. And our realtor said, you know what if we move from farming to hunting? And I said, what in the world do you mean by that? And he said, well, with farming, you wait for the crop to come, you wait for the harvest. In real estate, you wait for the buildings to come up for sale, and then you bid on them if they're for sale. But when you go from hunting to farming, you just go around and look for buildings, whether they're for sale or not. And you kind of hunt them. You tell the current owner, hey, are you interested in selling? So he told us to drive around downtown and look for buildings that would be suitable for our vision. And we found 2 of them. They weren't for sale, but we sent the owners unsolicited offer letters. One of the owners completely ignored us, which was to be expected, but the other one got back to us in a matter of just a couple of days, eager to talk to us. And long story short, that's the building we ended up buying. That's the building I'm sitting in right now. As you can imagine, buying a building right in the middle of downtown of a bustling city is not cheap. This is a very expensive project. It's a $17.5 million project to buy the building, to renovate the building. And we're relying entirely on the gifts of our existing congregation. Some people from the congregation really started stepping up. and saying they really believe in the vision. They believe that God is big enough for a big idea like this. And they came to me with some very, very, very generous and sacrificial contributions. People are really giving sacrificially. We have now raised over $12 million, $12.5 million, with another couple $1 million in conversation with people. So we're on our way to reaching $17.5 million. And I think it's pretty amazing that people would give so sacrificially. Some of the people who are giving large amounts and small amounts, well, some of them will actually not even be part of this church. They're not even doing it for selfish reasons. They're doing it because they believe that the residents of the city of Stamford have something to gain by us opening up this space. They realize after the pandemic that there's a lot of people who feel pretty isolated and alone. We all know that a little more now after the pandemic than we knew beforehand. I don't need to explain that to anybody watching this. We all tasted just the hurt and the terribleness that comes from being isolated in our homes. So people are excited to contribute towards opening up this cafe where people can come out of their apartments, come out of their isolation, and actually be together. Not just in a coffee shop for a cup of coffee, but we're going to be doing a lot of events in the evenings. Little concerts and art shows and many other ways that people can kind of come out of isolation and be together for community connection. Now, when is this going to be open? As you can see behind me, we're not anywhere close to being ready to open this thing. So the question comes up a lot, when will we be open? And our general contractor keeps assuring me that next year, 2023, around Thanksgiving or Christmas time, we'll be able to be fully open. We'll be able to flip on the light switches and have our certificate of occupancy, which is something we need from the town, and we'll be ready to go. Now, that's a pretty ambitious goal. But we're hoping that would be our open date. So November, December 2023. I hope to see you there. Right here is Atlantic Street. That's the exterior where you hear the cars maybe outside. And that's a pretty busy, bustling street. And here in the front of the building, which is the space I'm in right now, that's going to be our cafe. That's going to be our coffee shop. And if you look here at the back of the building, it's this large sanctuary. That's going to be over there on that side of the building. It's about a 400-seat capacity sanctuary for worship on Sundays. And what we're hoping to have is what we're calling a porous design, In other words, we want any barrier between the sanctuary and the coffee shop to be made out of glass so that it's visible. And then also there's going to be a large glass wall on the street level. So if you're walking by on the sidewalk and you look in and you see a coffee shop, you realize there's something more going on. There's something beyond the coffee shop, and it's a church. One of the reasons we're doing that is we don't want any bait and switch. We don't want anybody coming into the coffee shop and then suddenly feeling like they got tricked, that all of a sudden now they're in a church, not a coffee shop. No, we want it to be totally transparent, like I said, porous, right from the first impression of the coffee shop. So that's pretty exciting. And so we're hiring, we have a great architect and we're hiring some good designers because we really do want it to be a very inviting space. This is the basement drawing down here. We've got a lot going on in the basement, children's ministry, youth ministry, hangout spaces. One of the things we want to do is serve the city of Stamford by offering after-school tutoring. Right here we have a really cool design for the staircase that will go all the way to the basement. And above the staircase, I'm actually standing kind of near where this is going to be, right here in the building. We want a well-lit skylight above the staircase. And that's part of that porous design. We want there to be a beautiful daylight setting where when people come into the coffee shop, they'll see this beautiful staircase that's inviting to go further, not just downstairs on the stairs, but beyond and into the sanctuary, which is the rest of the building. There's also another floor above us, and what we're going to be building out on that floor is 3 apartments. And those apartments are going to be partly for the second chance employees that I mentioned earlier. We realize that yes, we can employ somebody, but for them to be able to afford to live in a city like Stamford would be difficult. So we want to be able to provide some really affordable, maybe even free housing for some of those recovery graduates. And we're hoping to also build out a beautiful deck on the roof. We think this is going to be a unique characteristic of our cafe. We don't know of any other rooftop cafes or spaces or event spaces here in Stamford, so it's a pretty cool skyline from the roof. So we're excited to build that out. And for the purposes of the church, the deck will also feature a prayer garden for people to come in and have spiritual time in the prayer garden.